Hello and welcome. In the fog of war in Afghanistan, with all the talk of surges, alliances and the so-called war on terror, the simple questions often get lost, like what is best for the people of that country and for real stability? The top UN envoy in Afghanistan, Kai Eide, sounded the alarm bells last week when he expressed his worries at the UN Security Council. He said the actions of the Western alliance in that country fuel suspicions of, quote, unacceptable foreign interference, unquote, and breed a sense of humiliation. As the Obama administration gears up to send 30,000 additional troops, the UN Special Representative called for a new approach, one that relies more on building the Afghan economy and civil institutions than military force. So today we ask, has the military option proved a failure in bringing peace and stability to Afghanistan? And if so, what other options are there? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments by SMS or email. Well, joining me today is the Norwegian diplomat Kai Eide, the UN Special Representative to Afghanistan and head of the UN Assistance Mission there. His two-year term ends this March. Ambassador Eide previously served as UN envoy to Kosovo, Bosnia-Herzegovina as well. He's joining us from Kabul. Ambassador, thank you very much for being with us. Now, I want to kick off initially with a question that's saying that looking back over the past 8 years at what's happened since the US went in the post-9/11 era, what real difference have the Afghan people seen? What benefit have they felt?
I think they have seen difference in education and in health and in road building, etc., in rural development, but certainly not enough. And if we compare the resources that we put into Afghanistan compared to what we put into Bosnia and Iraq, of course it's rather modest what we've done here. The expectations have been high, for instance after the Paris conference where $20 billion were promised. But the Afghan government lacks delivery tools to bring services to its people. That's why I also say let's not only focus on the military means here, we have to develop the civilian institutions and the economy. One day the resources provided by the international community will go down, and by then we have to have an Afghan economy that can generate revenues and sustain what we've done over the last few years. So we need to change our mindset and focus more on a political agenda rather than only a military agenda.
Now, you asked for a change of mindset, Ambassador, at the time when President Obama has committed 30,000 more troops. He's expecting some more from NATO. What difference will those troops make then?
Well, I think if they can be put fully to use to train the Afghan army and police and build that up, that will be part of an important transition strategy where the Afghans will take more responsibility for their future. But as I said, it has to be matched by an equally clear and strong commitment on the civilian side. And I'm afraid that more military troops will mean more quick impact thinking. That's not what we need. We need long-term thinking on building civilian institutions that are weak and an economy that is totally dependent on international aid. We have to get away from that thinking, and that's going to require a lot from us over the next few months. But these few months will be decisive in setting an agenda that really works.
Now, Ambassador, it's interesting you say that because I had the head of NATO and US forces in Afghanistan on my show recently, about a month ago, General Stanley McChrystal, and I want you to hear what he said on this issue of the new approach to Afghanistan that it seems the Obama administration wants.
I think what's really different or important in the strategy now and implementing the strategy from the Secretary General of NATO and also from President Obama is focusing on the people. It's protecting the people. It's convincing the people that our mission is not to fight with them or against them, but to fight alongside them for them. And that's the critical part.
Ambassador, listening to that, how convinced are you that is the mission as it's going to be, and how likely is it that those forces are going to focus on welfare as opposed to battling?
I think bringing 35,000 new troops in is going to be a big challenge. Stan McChrystal certainly has done a good job in reducing the number of civilian casualties. There is a new thinking among the military, but he will be faced with a tremendous challenge with 35,000 new troops coming in. And as I've said in Security Council, there is to demonstrate respect for Afghans, listen more to them, consult more with them. I think that will be absolutely critical. And there is a sense in a large part of the Afghan population that there is an invasion in terms of values, etc., that we don't respect their religion, their culture, their tradition enough. we have to get away from that. But I think that Stan McChrystal is also thinking in the same direction.
Now, Ambassador, should those troops seem to be more and more involved in issues such as nation building? They seem to be more involved in infrastructure projects. There's concern of the militarization of aid, as a lot of humanitarian and development agencies see it. How does that complicate your work? Should troops even be doing this kind of work?
Well, I've warned against this. I understand that the military get engaged in bigger infrastructure programs that others cannot do. But what we have to do wherever possible is to hand over civilian work to civilian institutions and to the Afghans. We have to build their capacity. If not, if we load more into the military structures, then we will become even more entrenched in Afghanistan. And reducing our military presence and reducing our aid will take even more time. So I warn against the military doing more civilian work. Of course, in some places they have to do it, but wherever possible, that work should be offloaded from the PRTs and from the military and onto civilian agencies, and in particularly Afghans who have to maintain them once the international community has gone. It's time to change that now, and I must say it's going to be hard, but I insist that this is the only way forward.
Now, interestingly enough, part of that equation that you're discussing here and giving the Afghans more control is obviously elections, and there are parliamentary elections scheduled for May the 22nd. How, in this current environment, can those elections be held in a free and fair manner?
It's going to be a great challenge. A calendar for the elections have been presented. It's the same calendar time-wise as for the presidential elections, but there's one big difference. We had 6 months of preparation before the presidential elections. Now we don't have that time available. So it's going to be very, very difficult to have the reforms implemented that we need to have the kind of elections that you pointed at and that we all want. So it's a dilemma. We are working hard with the president, with the Afghan authorities and with the election commission to see what kind of reforms can we implement before elections take place. Let me also add that there is a provision in the election law which opens up for the election commission to postpone the elections somewhat. That will certainly give us more time to implement reforms and to have an orderly election process. But it's ultimately up to the Afghans to decide if they want to accept that kind of delay or not.
Now, considering the criticism the United Nations faced last year with the presidential elections, with accusations of cover-up, of fraud and so on, how important is it the UN try and not have a role in these parliamentary elections to try to stay clear of what's going on?
First of all, I think the criticism came in particular for one person. There wasn't a joint international community behind the approach I took. When it comes to the future elections, we've learned a lot from what happened last year, and we have to implement reforms to make sure that we do our utmost to have a real independent election commission, and that also the transparency in the whole process is better than what we had in 2009. But I must say, there was a totally united international community behind the approach that we took. We did the best we could under the circumstances, but we all saw that altogether the elections did not by far live up to the expectations that we had.
Now, of course, that's left the issue of having a president in power that many people don't have faith in, and I wonder how much that's complicated your efforts in trying to get the international community to be more engaged. Does the international community, in your opinion, have enough confidence in President Karzai and his people?
The president has been elected. He's the president of the country. He is now putting together a government. I think the test will be in the performance of the government. We already see, I must say, a much more strategic approach to the development of the country now than we saw a year ago. There are some ministers already approved that could be ministers in any European government. They are of high quality, and we're working with them today and over the next few days to prepare for the London conference, which I hope will be a success. And as I said, they have a much more strategic approach to the development of the country than we have seen in previous times. So I do have hopes that we will now see a government that will be better functioning than we had in the past.
And Ambassador, could that government have a better role to play in the country overall rather than being stuck in the sort of bubble, controlled bubble of Kabul?
Well, as I said, one of the big priorities from my side is to develop the subnational governance That is not only a question of putting in place officials that are not corrupt. It's a huge undertaking which has to do with developing institutions locally. Right now, for instance, the district governors, half of them don't have a car, half of them don't have a dedicated office. They earn around $70 per month. They have an operational budget of $15 a month. It can't work like that. We need education, we need infrastructure, we need incentives in order to bring young, competent people into the subnational governance. But that challenge has been seriously underestimated by the international community over the last few years, and it's high time that we come to grips with that challenge.
Well, Ambassador, we'll look at some of those steps that you're suggesting in a moment when we come back. We're going to take a very short break here, and then more of our discussion with Ambassador Kai Eide in just a moment. We'll be right back. Welcome back. The Afghan people have known nothing but conflict and strife for decades, and now a leading UN diplomat says the military option is not working and it's time for a different approach. We're speaking with Kai Eide, the outgoing UN Special Envoy to Afghanistan, who's raised a number of eyebrows with his candid commentary on the situation in that country. Ambassador, you know, one of the issues that many people are wondering is whether or not hearts and minds can truly be won in Afghanistan, considering there's been 8 years of such severe conflict. Can the Afghan people really be won over at this stage?
I think it's important to make a distinction here. It's not up to the international community to win hearts and minds. It's up to the Afghan authorities to gain the confidence of its people. We have to support them on that. That's why we are now emphasizing a transition strategy, giving the Afghans more authority and more responsibility for the future. That has to do with the training of the security forces, but also, as I said, the civilian institutions, and not least the economy. We need to generate a real Afghan economy that can sustain the progress that we have made over the last few years. That means also moving away from the thousands and thousands of small projects that have been undertaken by the international community and onto more strategic infrastructural programs that can make use of the tremendous resources that this country has. We haven't done that so far, and we need to embark on that as soon as possible. That means railways, it means electricity grids, it means being able to extract the minerals that the country has. That's the kind of push we need in order to generate a real well-functioning Afghan economy. It's going to take time, but the longer we wait, the longer this country will depend on foreign assistance, which will be reduced over the years. So we have a challenge here that we need to address immediately.
And of course, those issues that you raise, Ambassador, dependent to a large degree on security. For those things to function, there has to be some security. And a viewer sent in a question from Kenya. If I could put this to you, sir, by email, Mohammed Abdurrahim Sheikh wrote in saying, can a dialogue with the Taliban bring a sort of stability to Afghanistan? If yes, how can the Taliban be involved? What do you think?
Well, I've always said that there should be a political process, a peace process, which also involves insurgency, including the Taliban. I believe it's important in order to bring the country to peace. It's going to be demanding, but I have always said that there is ultimately no military solution to this. It has to be a political solution, and the peace process certainly has to be an important part of that. We are now discussing reintegration. That means reintegration of Taliban soldiers who want to come back to normal life. I believe that reintegration process has to go in parallel with the reconciliation process, where also what I call the superstructures of the insurgency is involved. I think it is an unavoidable component in an overall strategy for Afghanistan.
Now, of course, you're known for speaking very candidly, for saying things that need to be said, but of course, some in the international community are reluctant to hear. But I wonder, to what degree did your public disagreement with your deputy, Ambassador Peter Galbraith, have on basically the mission there, on the UN mission? Do you think it damaged the credibility of the UN mission to go so public with the dispute?
It's quite obviously that it damaged the mission. I think we're recovering from that. It was one man against the rest of the international community. It was undignified, and I regret it very much. But that's something that now belongs to the past. We have to address the next few months, which will be of critical importance, both in security and development, and also with elections coming up. So I believe that that is a chapter that now has been closed and is behind us.
Now, earlier this month, you were very candid in your comments too in what needs to be done, and in basically saying that the strategy needs to be so directly changed as you've indicated on this program. What made you come out in such a critical and vocal way at this stage? Why not earlier?
I have said many of these things before, but I believe that at the Security Council now, which was my last appearance to the Security Council, I had to be very clear on what I see as the basic challenges. And it was not only because it was my last appearance, it's because we have a London conference coming up, we have a Kabul conference coming up later this spring. Those two events, I believe, will be critical in turning some of the negative trends that we've seen over the last few years. So I think it was the right moment to be candid and clear about the challenges facing us.
Now, to what degree, I mean, because America has dominated the situation in Afghanistan to such a large degree, to what extent do you think the European community could do more? To what extent has it been missing in the equation?
I think the Europeans are doing a lot, but I believe also that, for instance, on the police training side, the Europeans should have done more, should do more. And I've said that over and over again. This cannot be this cannot become an effort that is totally Americanized. It has had a broad international participation, and I was very, very encouraged yesterday in Abu Dhabi in a big meeting there, where also all the Gulf countries, or most of the Gulf countries were involved, and more Muslim countries. We want to see more of a Muslim engagement in the overall efforts here. I think that will be very useful, very helpful, and also create greater confidence between the international community and the Afghan people in what we're doing.
Now, it's interesting, we had an email question that came from Australia, if I could put this to you, Ambassador, from Nasser Ghafoor, who wrote in saying, the only way to reverse the spiraling trend in Afghanistan towards a society based on corruption is to remove the foreign democratic system currently in place and replace it with a more culturally acceptable system such as jirgas. Now, I wonder how important, you mentioned the need to go out and be much more engaged in the country in general. I wonder how much this devolving power to local authorities and letting the country run itself to some degree through perhaps more traditional methods might be a valid system for Afghanistan.
I think we have to do both. We have established a democratic elected government. There will be elections again for parliament. We are establishing local institutions. There were provincial elections. But we also have to make use of the traditional mechanisms that the Afghans have. There is talk of a possible peace jirga sometime in the near future. I think that's important. And let me say one other thing. We need to mobilize the people more than we've done so far for a peaceful solution. That means the village leaders, the religious leaders. I'm certainly engaged in doing that. I think that's a valuable and perhaps indispensable component in bringing this country to peace.
What about trust, Ambassador? Because this email that we got from Pakistan, from Salman Abdul Wahid, that came into our Facebook page, says, go to Afghanistan and check who the bad man is. The US terrorist army is killing innocent people in Afghanistan. If they start providing electricity and giving them a few dollars, it does not mean that they are good. How can you overcome the trust issues that perhaps have been so heavily eroded over the past nearly 10 years?
Well, first of all, I must say I believe that the current commander of ISAF and US forces, Stan McChrystal, is doing his very best in order to reduce civilian casualties, and he has succeeded. To a large extent. We had a survey coming out a few days ago from the UN, which shows that now 68% of the civilian casualties are caused by the insurgencies, and only 32 or less than that, in fact, by the international community. But there's still a long way to go. I do believe that we need to invest much more in demonstrating respect, as I said, for the Afghan culture, tradition, for their religion. It's important in order to maintain the partnership that we need for years to come between Afghanistan and the international community. This is not only a question of US forces, it's a question of the attitude that we from the West take towards the Afghan community. And as I say, respect, avoiding situations where the Afghans feel humiliated. That is tremendously important. And I must add to that, this goes from the top level of government down to the villages. It needs, again, as I said, a mindset in the way we approach the Afghan society.
Interesting, Ambassador. I'm going to squeeze in one more question here from the USA. This came from Michigan, from Linda Taylor, who wrote in saying, even some of the most remote Taliban villages are happy to see foreign troops because